I started franchising when I was 66 years old. The same company that I sold for $2 million was sold for $240 million. Yesterday I didn't get any of that. This is the story of Colonel Sanders, a man who failed at almost everything he tried for the first 65 years of his life and was rejected over 1,000 times before building one of the most recognizable brands on the planet. This isn't just a business story. This is a story about what happens when you refuse to give up, even when the entire world tells you you're finished. Act 1. The Broken Beginning. Harland Sanders was born on a small farm in Indiana on September 9, 1890. When he was just 5 years old, his father died, and the family's stability vanished overnight. His mother was forced to take on every odd job she could find, working as a seamstress and at a canning factory, doing whatever it took to put food on the table. This meant she couldn't be home to take care of her children. And so, at just 7 years old, Harland Sanders became responsible for cooking for his 2 younger siblings. Night after night, young Harland stood in that kitchen, experimenting with whatever ingredients they had. He'd stay up late, practicing, and through all that trial and error, he became a genuinely good cook. When Sanders turned 10, he got a job working on a local farm. But he loved animals so much that instead of doing his actual work, he'd spend hours playing with the farm animals. Eventually, the farmer fired him. When Sanders came home and told his mother, she looked at him and said something that would haunt him for years. "You're just no good. Here I am, left alone with 3 children to support, and you won't even work enough so somebody will keep you. I guess I'll never be able to count on you." Those words cut deep. Sanders vowed in that moment to make something of his life. But before he could even begin, his life got worse. His mother remarried to a violent man who made it clear he didn't want these stepchildren. So at just 12 years old, Sanders moved out and went to make his own way in the world. He found work at another farm, waking before dawn to feed animals, going to school during the day, and taking any other work in the evenings. It was too much. Since Sanders hated school, particularly algebra, he dropped out at just 13 years old. Over the next several years, Sanders tried virtually every job imaginable. He became a streetcar conductor, insurance salesman, tire salesman, steamboat operator, midwife, secretary, and carriage painter. At 15, he lied about his age and joined the U.S. Army, serving in Cuba for about 6 months before getting discharged for being underage. By 18, Sanders got married and had 3 kids. He needed something stable, so he pursued a career in law, taking a correspondence course and building the beginnings of a legal career. But then he got into a physical fight in a courtroom with his own client. His reputation was destroyed. His legal career was over. So he got a job working for the railroad, but then got fired from that too. When he came home to tell his wife, he found that she'd packed up everything, given away their furniture, taken their 3 children, and moved back with her parents. Sanders was devastated. In his desperation, he actually hid in the woods near his in-laws' house with a plan to kidnap his own children when they came outside. But at the last moment, he spoke with his father-in-law instead, who brought him back to reality. He reconciled with his wife, but the marriage wouldn't last. In 1947, one of their sons died at just 20 years old. The grief drove them apart permanently, and they divorced. By this point, Sanders had lived nearly 50 years, and all you could see was failure after failure after failure. Act 2. The Breakthrough. At age 40, Harland Sanders found himself in Kentucky, working at a Shell gas station. To make extra money, he set up a single table with 6 chairs in the back room and started cooking meals for travelers. He made ham, steaks, string beans, and hot biscuits, but there was one dish he knew could be a real moneymaker: fried chicken. The problem was traditional fried chicken took 30 to 35 minutes to cook. Deep frying was faster but made the chicken dry and crusty. Then Sanders had an idea. Pressure cookers were becoming popular for cooking vegetables, but what if he could use one for chicken? He experimented endlessly with time, pressure, fat, and filtration until he finally cracked it. He could cook chicken in just 8 to 9 minutes while keeping it juicy and flavorful. Then he created his secret blend of 11 herbs and spices. When that perfectly cooked chicken met that incredible seasoning, it became an instant bestseller. Sanders understood he needed marketing, so he painted advertisements on barn doors around the local area. It worked beautifully, but a competitor named Matt Stewart got annoyed and started painting over Sanders' ads. Sanders warned him to stop, even threatened to shoot him, but Stewart kept doing it. So Sanders and two gas station managers went to confront Stewart. When Stewart saw them coming, he pulled out a gun and fired. The bullet missed Sanders but killed one of the managers instantly. Sanders returned fire, hitting Stewart in the shoulder. Stewart got 18 years in prison for murder, while Sanders walked free on self-defense. With his main competitor behind bars, Sanders' sales soared. His reputation grew so much that in 1935 the governor of Kentucky gave him an honorary title, Kentucky Colonel. Sanders embraced it completely, insisting everyone call him Colonel Sanders. That same year, he opened a proper restaurant with 142 seats. After decades of struggling, he'd finally found success. But then in 1939, his restaurant burned down. He rebuilt it, but by then World War II had broken out. Without tourists and travelers, the business couldn't survive, and he had to sell. When the war ended, Sanders opened another restaurant, and for years it was successful. But in the 1950s, a new interstate highway was built that completely bypassed his location. His sales collapsed. Sanders was forced to auction off his business at a loss. It was 1955. He was 65 years old with no business, no income except his $105 monthly Social Security check. But Sanders didn't see this as the end. As he said in his biography, it wasn't a matter of giving up, it was just a problem of what to do next. Act 3. The Resurrection. Sanders asked himself what he had that was valuable. The answer was his chicken recipe, but he was too old and too broke to open another restaurant. So he came up with a different idea: franchising. He'd let other restaurants sell his chicken and charge them 4 cents per chicken sold. Sanders loaded his 1946 Ford with pressure cookers and his seasoning blend and hit the road. His plan was to drive across America, stopping at restaurants and convincing owners to become franchisees. The reality was brutal. Sanders lived out of his car, driving exhausting hours every day. He'd approach restaurant owners with his pitch, and more often than not, he'd be turned down. According to reports, Sanders was rejected 1,009 times before someone finally said yes. 1,009 rejections. But Sanders kept going. Finally, in 1952, Pete Harmon in South Salt Lake, Utah agreed to try, and the results were immediate. Harmon's sales tripled in the first year. It was actually Pete Harmon who came up with the phrase, "finger lickin' good." Word spread quickly after that success. Within a couple of years, restaurant owners across the country started coming to Sanders. He didn't have to hunt for franchisees anymore. They called him Sanders, protected his recipe by sending the spice blend pre-made rather than sharing the formula, understanding that a secret recipe generated more intrigue. By the end of 1963, Colonel Sanders had franchised over 600 outlets across the United States and Canada. Within another couple of years, that grew to 900 outlets, expanding into the UK and Japan. The franchise model was a massive success. Sanders, who'd spent 65 years failing, was now wealthy and finally financially secure. Act 4. The Sale and the Betrayal. KFC was thriving, but then a group of investors led by 29-year-old John Brown approached Sanders. John had noticed that KFC didn't even have a sales team and was relying entirely on word of mouth. He saw massive untapped potential. Initially, Sanders refused to sell. This business was his child. But John persisted, offering $2 million with a promise. He'd never tamper with the Colonel's recipe, would maintain quality control, and wanted Sanders to stay on as an advisor and ambassador. In 1964, 73-year-old Sanders agreed. He became a millionaire but barely stepped away, traveling worldwide for promotions and wearing his white suit daily. John Brown made operational changes that helped KFC grow exponentially. But in 1971, John sold the company to a giant food conglomerate, and everything changed. Unlike John Brown, these new owners had no loyalty to Sanders' vision. They changed the gravy recipe to something cheaper and easier to make. When Sanders tried it, he was horrified, calling it pure wallpaper paste. He called the chicken nothing but a damn fried dough ball stuck on some chicken. His public criticism was so harsh that one franchisee sued him for libel in 1978, though the case was thrown out. Sanders' anger didn't stop at criticism. He opened his own competing restaurant, Claudia Sanders, the Colonel's Lady Dinner House. This led to KFC suing their own founder over copyright of his name. Sanders countersued for $122 million for misusing his image. Eventually, they settled. Sanders got $1 million but had to rename his restaurant to simply Claudia Sanders Dinner House. That restaurant still exists today and is the only place to get the original Colonel Sanders recipe. Sanders remained a fighter until the end. In 1980, he died from acute leukemia at age 90, working until just 1 month before his death. He said he had no interest in retiring and sitting around doing nothing. Conclusion. The legacy. Today, there are over 25,000 KFC outlets worldwide, generating billions in revenue annually. It all started with a guy cooking chicken in a gas station. Think about Sanders' timeline. For 40 years, nothing but failure and tragedy. At 65, he was broke with a $105 monthly check, but he started franchising at 66, lived in his car, faced over 1,000 rejections, and by 74 was a millionaire with a global brand. The lesson isn't just about persistence. It's about refusing to accept other people's definitions of when your life is supposed to be over. Sanders didn't start the business that made him famous until 66, when most people are collecting pensions. Colonel Sanders said it best. One has to remember that every failure can be a stepping stone to something better. Every job he lost, every business that failed, every rejection, they were all steps on a staircase. And he kept climbing. So the next time you see that smiling Colonel Sanders in his white suit, remember what it really represents. It's a reminder that it's never too late to start over, that failure isn't final unless you decide it is, and that sometimes the greatest success stories don't begin until most people think the story is already over.